Welcome back to CrimsonCast. I am Galen Clavio, and we are back. And we're a little early in the week from where we normally start, but there's a reason for that.
We're excited.
We're really excited as you hear Scott chiming in from the other monitor up in CrimsonCast Studio 2. Or I guess that's CrimsonCast Studio 1. This is Studio 2. But regardless, we're happy to be joining you folks. It's a Wednesday night, which means, not normally football. But for us, it does mean football. And it means a preview of a huge game for IU, one of their biggest season openers as far as Big Ten play has been concerned for a long time, as they host the Michigan State Spartans in Memorial Stadium coming up on Saturday. I'll go ahead and bring in not just my co-host, Scott Caulfield, but also his friend Robert, who is a Michigan State guy and is here to give us some insight on Sparty and what we might expect coming up in this game on Saturday. Robert, welcome to the podcast. Happy to have you on board.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to join you guys.
And I got to say, I moved to Westfield. I love Robert's a neighbor, too. I love my street. But, I'm in north side of Indiana. And, IU guy, I'm excited to have IU fans. My neighbors are like, I got Purdue. I got Ohio State, which is a effing mess. I got Wisconsin. I got Michigan State. I got another Purdue. There's only two Butlers. This is like a freaking Big Ten summit here. I got one other IU fan on the street.
I mean, didn't you even like a Purdue basketball player on your front porch at one point?
I have. Oh yeah, we'll save that story for October. Yes, yeah. I have a former IU basketball player who stole something.
Purdue basketball player.
Purdue player who is very prominently known in the 90s. Who I booed. You and I hated. Who stole something off my front porch, who I will be seeing again at a Halloween party. Oh, God, I'm so excited. I might even dress up like him for Halloween.
I think that's absolutely the way to go.
Yeah, but Robert is a Michigan State fan through and through. He stuck with him through the whole Nassar affair. He's still there. So I brought him on to talk a little bit about Michigan State because this is a huge game. If Indiana can get this win, it really is. It's really almost program changing. Purdue's Michigan State kind of is our punching bag when they come to Bloomington. So, but just wanted to hear the Michigan State side of things.
For 2 years, yeah, maybe. But now let's go ahead and chat a little bit. Let's set the scene first and foremost. We got IU taking on Michigan State. IU comes in 3-0. I think all of our listeners and viewers probably know that. And by the way, for those of you watching live, thank you for taking time out of your evening, quite unexpectedly, to watch us here. But if you've got questions or comments, you can hit us up on Twitter. Several people have done so and have left us questions and comments that we'll be getting to later. You can also utilize the YouTube chat. We've got that open, and we're ready to take whatever comments you happen to have throughout the course of the podcast. But going back to the preview here, Michigan State coming in with a record of 1-1, and it's been a little bit surprising how they've gotten there. A 38-31 squeaker at home over what is, in all fairness, a relatively decent Utah State team. That was followed then by a very late night loss at Arizona State, kind of a surprise. I think everybody expected the Herm Edwards experiment to be a dumpster fire of epic proportions from the get-go. It wasn't. They ended up winning that game at the end, and a little bit of doubt being cast now on a Michigan State team that entered the season with some pretty impressive bona fides. I mean, a team that certainly had rebounded from a tough year 2 years ago to be a contender last year. And then this year, many people were looking at them as maybe a dark horse to even potentially challenge for the Big Ten East if everything went right. So, Robert, let's just cut right to you on this. Talk to us about this Michigan State team. What is it? What's your perception of the team? Are things going wrong? What's gone wrong? And what should IU fans be watching out for when they watch this team?
I think the whole key of the game will come down to the offensive line play. It's been terrible up front. Against Arizona State, our center, we went through two different centers that have been rotating back and forth, and they are just getting blown off the balls on run plays. Our left tackles also missed the first two games. So those will be the keys. If Cole Chewins is back, that'll be a big help for Michigan State's offensive line. And I think they're going to have to turn to one of the Allen brothers at center because Tyler Higbee has just not been setting it there. They have a pro quarterback and a nice set of receivers. If they can get some protection and the ability to run the ball, they should do pretty well in this game. On the defensive side, they're without Josiah Scott at cornerback, who's one of their top defensive players, if not their best player. Their pass defense has been hurting, but I still think they'll be pretty strong. And then just from a historical perspective, IU's played them really tough. I would expect IU to jump out early and lead most of the game, and then Michigan State seems to rally back against Indiana. 2 years ago, IU won the game, and it really tailspinned Michigan State's entire season and program for a year. So
we were talking about that in the car like a couple weeks ago. Robert's like, dude, 2 years ago, you ended our season. Like, that was like the end of the season for you guys.
It was brutal. Never seen a program fall that fast, that quick. And that, on IU side, they stormed the court. I was at the game. It was a heck of a game. So, but I think offensive line versus how they match up against Indiana's defensive line, and then also our pass defense against Indiana's pass offense will be kind of the two keys.
Yeah, it's interesting because if you look at the way that Michigan State last year played Indiana, of course, that game up in East Lansing where IU has traditionally not won many games. It was a close game.
In football or basketball.
Well, yeah, either one. I think IU's won once in basketball there since like the early 90s. It's been rough. But, but that was a game last year that, we thought that, that was still at a point, I think, in the season when people really felt like IU had a chance to do something really special. And, both teams' offenses really struggled to get anything going. And it wasn't until very, very late in the contest, as you mentioned, that Michigan State was able to make a couple of plays and really pull away.
It wasn't that game like 9-6 in the fourth? It was like within 3 points for like till the fourth quarter.
Yeah, no, it was absolutely a very close contest. Last year's Michigan State team obviously solved some of the problems that they faced from the year before. One of the big ones for them last year was, it was a team that surrendered over 4 yards a rush in 2016, that year when everything went wrong. They only surrendered about 3.3 yards per rush last year. And, this year they haven't really faced much of a rushing attack. They obviously, both Utah State and Arizona State were kind of doing things through the air more than anything else. I guess my question to you is defensively, since that seems to be IU's offensive strength right now, how do you see this Michigan State defense matching up in the running game against IU?
They're very stout against the run. I would be surprised if IU's able to establish a consistent running game against them. I would expect them to be a top 10 against the run defense all year long. And they're returning almost every single player from last year up in their front seven. Yeah,
it's interesting looking at the numbers. If you go to the S&P Plus from Football Outsiders, which I highly recommend all of our listeners do, this is a predictive set of metrics that looks at a variety of factors. But one of the things that they do is they'll look at your offensive ranking, your defensive ranking, your special teams ranking, and then they'll use that to kind of put together a composite ranking of your overall team. And Michigan State right now, they're 20th in the country in the S&P Plus. And if you look at their individual components, they're 34th in offense, they're 28th in defense, and 29th in special teams. By comparison, Indiana is 52nd in offense, 16th in defense, 96th in special teams. So, but Indiana's managed to win, games at a clip that's more impressive to this ranking system than Michigan State. It's really going to be interesting looking at these two teams matching up because, ultimately going on the road is difficult for any team in the Big Ten. And, it's certainly Memorial Stadium hasn't exactly been a house of horrors for a huge number of teams historically, but it can be difficult to play in, particularly if you're not at such an elite level talent-wise that you're just, 2 or 3 levels of magnitude above IU. And I think that while Michigan State certainly had a lot of success here in the D'Antonio era, it's not like you're doing it with a bunch of 5-star recruits. You're doing it with a lot of 3- and 4-star guys who have been coached up effectively, who are being put in good positions. And that certainly hats off to Michigan State, but I wouldn't look at them in this and say, wow, that's the same sort of talent collection that Ohio State would bring to the table or Penn State would bring to the table.
You're definitely correct on that. It's more so 2 and 3 stars than 3 and 4 stars. Every year they seem to pluck a couple, 3 or 4 of them, but that's about it. And I think you're right too. Whichever team is able to find a balance on offense is really going to, have a strong advantage in this game because both teams have, Michigan State has just not been able to run the ball, and when they're passing, everyone knows it's coming, and they've gotten no time for their quarterbacks. So balance will be key for both teams.
Now I have a question, Robert. Are you scared about Stevie Scott coming in to play you guys. The freshman running back who's currently 8th in the country in rushing. I rephrase this again. Going into the Big Ten, we have a rusher who's 8th in the country at 388 yards.
I am not at all.
There you go. Yeah.
After facing Saquon last year and shutting him down and, several others, I just think Michigan State's scheme they're pretty all in on shutting down the run. And, again, I would be surprised if there's a consistent running game for Indiana. But passing is it'll be available if they're able to throw the ball.
Yeah, I mean, that's the part when I look at this that scares me, that, Michigan State has only given up 69 yards rushing all year so far. They've given up 699 passing. And that's, I think from our perspective, that's what scares me, is that you're like, everything is on Stevie Scott, a freshman running back who's had 3 great games and 10th, 8th in the country in rushing. Just got to continue to say that as long as we can. But that does make me a little scared, because it seems like for us to win, we got to have a great passing game, and that also puts us either Peyton Ramsey, which isn't going to do well, or he doesn't have the throwing ability, or Penix, who's a true freshman who's had, 18 snaps under center.
It is an interesting question, and it does kind of make you wonder, is that the Michigan State defense, are they just that stout against the running game, or is it a stylistic element of the way that teams are choosing to play them? The Utah State game was kind of informative. Like, Utah State's leading rusher, Darwin Thompson, only rushed for 25 yards on 25 carries in that game. And yet he scored 3 touchdowns in the game. And what they were primarily doing was utilizing their passing game. Jordan Love in that contest had by far his best game of the year. It was 29 of 44, 319 yards on the game. Didn't get a touchdown pass, but they were moving the ball primarily through the air. And that, I do kind of wonder whether we see IU try to do something similar, or whether they're just like, we feel like we can match up with our offensive line against what Michigan State is bringing to the table. The other aspect here, I think the flip side of things, is how does IU's defense and their youth, even though they've certainly gotten better over the course of the last few games, how does that match up against what Michigan State tries to do offensively? Because, you can kind of, if you put the shoe on the other foot here, as far as the Spartans are concerned, not the most impressive offensively so far, only 25.5 points per game average. Granted, that's just through 2 games, not running the ball particularly well. And, you've obviously gotten pretty good play out of Lewerke so far on the season, but, 3 touchdown passes, 2 interceptions. He's kind of had to carry them offensively. So it does make you wonder if IU can get a bit of a pass rush on this Michigan State team, how will they be able to handle that? Because I doubt that either Arizona State or Utah State has really been able to get that much pressure on them so far.
They've gotten both teams have actually gotten pretty good pressure, and I think it's a big fault of that. I mean, the right tackle against Utah State got killed. I think Lewerke was sacked 3 times in the first half. One thing I would expect to see out of Indiana is to go up tempo. That's really been hurting Michigan State's defense in both games. When they faced an up tempo, both teams threw a lot of wide receiver screens and quick passes to the flats. And that'll help break up the running defense. Michigan State tends to stick with 1 high safety and 8 in the box quite a bit and plays a lot of man coverage. So I would expect you'll see a lot of action to both flats, just to kind of wear out the defense early. And that seemed to work in both games. And then, pressure-wise, I'll be surprised if Indiana isn't able to get pressure on Lewerke, because everyone else has all year.
We never seem to be able to do that, though. We never seem to be able to get effective pressure on the quarterback when other teams are having trouble with it.
Yeah, it's kind of a give and take sort of deal. If you look at what IU has been able to do so far on the season, they did have their best pressure game in the game versus Ball State, 3 sacks there. And, even if you look at last year, they would get to that 3 sack threshold, in certain games last year. They did it against Wisconsin. They did it against Michigan State. They did it against Maryland. Where IU's been really effective defensively the last couple of years is when they've been able to get up and beyond that mark, or when they've been able to at least get hurries out of it and put themselves in a position where they can get the quarterback throwing off his back foot or having to throw on the run. You could make an argument that, the 2 best defensive performances that IU had in the Big Ten last year were probably the Illinois game and the Rutgers game, and they had a combined 12 sacks in those games. Granted, neither of those teams is very good, but that's the sort of effectiveness that you're going to need to see out of this IU team defensively. And I think, there's a likelihood that they're going to be able to do that. It's just a matter of, what's the tempo of the game from the get-go. That is one last question I had as far as Michigan State's style is concerned. Are they deliberate in the way that they go about things? Do they like to hurry it up at all? How do they manage their offensive tempo?
Very deliberate. They're going to huddle most every play. I would tend to, they're more of the, they try to establish the run. They haven't been able to do that, but, slow the game down and let their defense kind of take over is still their style. I think they've been that way mostly under D'Antonio. So, their preferred is always going to be to try and keep it to, a 24-20 game. That's what I would think they're looking to keep it a close scoring, low scoring game.
Yeah. Well, this is excellent. I mean, we appreciate the insight so far. Feel free to stick around if you'd like to. We're going to
absolutely
tackle some users.
Well, no, I have a couple questions then for
knock it out.
Finish the Robert section of the podcast. We ruined your guys' season 2 years ago, which I appreciate. We don't get to do that much. Although I think wasn't like John L. Smith who, after we beat Michigan State, you guys fired him like the next day.
I think there was a run of 3 or 4 coaches after Saban.
Here's my question: if we'll talk about it from the Indiana perspective, but I'm just curious from a Michigan State perspective. If we go and by the way, I will say, Robert and I are going to the game together. We're bringing my kindergarten son, his first grade son. So wish us luck in that. 2 kids at 6:30 start. We've already told the kids, like, you're powering through. Like, if the game is close,
they gotta suck it up.
Yeah, we're both kind of dads where it's like they got to figure it out. And so if you see kids crying or 2 parents getting arrested by CPS, that'll be us in section 108. But my question to Robert is, what would we're going to look at from an IU perspective. A win would be immensely important for IU at this point, kind of almost be program changing for a couple things we'll talk about. But I'm curious from a Michigan State perspective, a win is good, but what would a loss do for you guys this year? Like what would that kind of set your season toward if you guys lost on Saturday?
Season ruiner. Not so much against Indiana, just losing 2 in a row, 1 coming off a bye here. This is their chance to right the ship. And if they don't come out and play, they have to win. I don't really care what the score is, but they have to win to catapult them into a nice run and to start Big Ten play. They have a very favorable schedule with some of the Big Ten East foes, but you have to win at Indiana if you're going to do anything special in the Big Ten, I think.
Yeah, we talked about this on our post game for Ball State. Like, I really wish as an Indiana fan we got you guys last week. Like, I think you guys having a bye, the more I think about it, you guys having a bye really helps out.
It was, coming off a 2 a.m. finish with 100-degree temperature in Arizona. It was a well-planned bye, just pretty poor execution late in that game.
So we're not talking – if Indiana wins, are we not talking on the drive back?
It'll be basketball season for Michigan State.
It is interesting, though, that so much rides on this game for both teams, because I think you bring an interesting point up, this idea that regardless of who you are, if it's a game outside of the basically Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan in the conference, you can't afford to lose any of those games. Whether you're Michigan State or Indiana or Maryland or Rutgers, I guess. But none of those teams, if you're planning on having serious contention for a bowl bid, you just really have to take advantage of those particular matchups. And it's probably worse for Michigan State. Now, that said, you guys are going to beat Michigan, so you'll get one back.
but hope so.
Yeah, but this idea that if Michigan State especially having lost to Arizona State, it's really, really difficult to see a path to anything, past like the Holiday Bowl, for this Michigan State team if you don't pull this one out. And that's got to be a disappointment given the anticipation that you all had coming into this season.
Yeah, everyone's talked about double-digit wins and getting to a big-time bowl. I think college playoffs is a little bit too high of an expectation just given the talent level. But, if they fall short of 10 wins in a pretty solid bowl, I would be disappointed. We're turning 19 starters off a 10-3 team.
Yeah. Do you think – I don't want to get ahead of it. Do you think that like if Indiana jumps out to a lead, like if we're up 14-3 or something, do you think there would be pressure, like from the way that D'Antoni's coached? Like, do you think they'd feel pressure in this game if we get to the third quarter and like they're down? Because I know like when Indiana played Ohio State a couple times, like we've been ahead of Ohio State. I never felt like Ohio State was like gripping or anything. Like I just think they were waiting to break it open. Like, do you think Michigan State would feel pressure in this game if they were down?
I almost expect Indiana to jump out to a touchdown 7 to 10 point lead. I think if you look back over the last 3 or 4 times they've played, it's always been Indiana leading going into the fourth quarter. Sometimes I want to say once by even 2 touchdowns or close to that, and they came back. So I would expect that to happen. Michigan State's a pretty poised team. I will give them that, but there's certainly going to be a lot of pressure come fourth quarter if they're down by more than a touchdown.
It's interesting, and certainly, it's a Michigan State team that has played some back and forth games. Even last year, was playing a lot of back and forth games, and really, I think this Michigan State team, on the road they seem to occasionally, struggle more than you would expect, but not always. Like that's the thing I think that I find the hardest to grasp sometimes about Michigan State. Like last year's a good example. You go in and you've got that game at Northwestern as an example where it's an early kind of back and forth, and then gradually, there's a comeback, I think, or maybe Northwestern comes back early, whatever it is, but it was a lot more of a seesaw battle than I would have expected, given how well Michigan State had played going into that contest. So I don't know. I mean, it's a curious roster because then you look at something like the Michigan game last year, and Michigan State jumped out to an early lead and was able to just kind of hold off Michigan. Now, Michigan not having an offense certainly helped.
Yeah, the torrential rain in that game too.
Yeah, exactly. So, but it is a hard team to get a handle on sometimes, just because I feel like there's some games where they just come out and they seem really ready to play, and there's other games where it takes a while for the spark to hit, and sometimes it doesn't hit soon enough for them. I mean, is that something that's been like a consistent artifact of the D'Antonio era, or is there something is that just something that's with this recent group of players?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. With Michigan being the one exception, they seem always ready for that game, but other than that, it doesn't. Especially our first 2 or 3 games of the year have always seemed to. It doesn't matter if it's Utah State or who we're playing. It's the first game of the year is always disappointing and kind of a struggle. So this is the game that I think will tell whether or not they're for real or not. And I think the same for Indiana, because if Indiana comes out and somehow wins the game by 2 touchdowns and controls, you're looking at a different program than you've had here in probably a number of years.
I agree with that, and I would say too, I think from all the stuff we talked about with the run defense from Michigan State, if Indiana wins, and let's say Stevie Scott really does throw out a $120 in yardage, I think suddenly we're looking at him with a much different light. Holy shit, this is actually there's something real going on here. If Stevie Scott can literally throw 100 yards at Michigan State and we can win, I think there's a lot of cool conversations we're having on our post game on Sunday.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, obviously that
dare dream.
Well, it's one of those things where I think there's a lot of potential narratives, and the idea of what's going to be the dominant force in this game is an interesting one. Scott, did you have any other questions for Robert before we get to Twitter questions?
I don't. You gonna stick around?
Yeah, I'll stick around. I'll let you guys take over, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, no, let's circle back at the very end and give them some shit about some basketball recruits that are taken away from Michigan State.
I think we need to save that for a different podcast. Let's not blow all of our material at once, but let's talk with some of our listeners here, as we had some people writing in. So, first question from the hospital ball. How do we balance wild optimism against past results? My initial response to this was beer. But in all reality, this is something that's been a little bit of a debate over the course of the last week or so, especially in the aftermath of IU winning as convincingly as they did against Ball State. This idea of, okay, so if you look at the way that the schedule lays out, and if you look at people's reaction to how IU is playing football so far, a lot of people really look at this team and they're already saying, oh, I think this is a special team. This is something different. This is something that we haven't seen before. There's a different feel around this team. And that, that's a seductive way of looking at things, because it really does put you in a position where you want to believe. You're like Mulder in the X-Files. It's like kind of without having yet seen a run of 4 or 5 victories in a row, you want to look at what you've got so far, which has been impressive given the competition and the overall level, and the fact that there's been increases in, I think, quality each week for IU. But now you're moving into a different phase. You're moving into the Big Ten season, which is historically where IU has faltered. And you've still got people who are looking at this and say, man, they win this game and they win the next game. They're 5-0 for the first time since 1967, as you pointed out in the last podcast, Scott. And, then even if you stumble over a couple of teams, you could get to 8 wins here, maybe 9. I mean, 10's not out of the picture. And it's like, okay, how do you balance that as a rational IU football fan with how these things have often gone, where, you may get off to a good start, but then there's always stumbles and the team kind of hits a ceiling, and then sometimes they push through the ceiling as they did, in 2015 and 2016, and sometimes you don't get through the ceiling. Sometimes you bang your head against it, kind of like what they did last year, frankly. So, to some degree, the way I'm approaching it, and this is as someone who's watched IU football since the mid '80s, has been through a lot of ups and a whole lot more downs. To me, it's the same perspective I've had since before the season started, when I, initially had us picked at 5-7. And then, when the Maryland thing imploded, I think I upped that to 6-6. But my philosophy has been, I need to see it on the field before I'm really willing to jump fully into this, completely optimistic ideal of IU football being on a different plane than what we've seen before. And I think that's my message to most people, is that you can certainly believe that this team is made up of different stuff, better stuff than what we've seen before. But, ultimately it still has to manifest itself on the field. And this has just been a program that, both historically and recently has struggled to get over the hump, to break through, to borrow a phrase, and get to that next level. So that's how I'm looking at it, Scott. I'm curious as to how you're looking at it.
Well, first off, Chronic Hoosiers going to be very disappointed in you. Beer's a good answer, but whiskey would be the better answer. That's to answer. That's what Chronic Hoosiers. I
didn't want to get on his corner. That's he's posted up there. It's fine.
I know. Sorry, Chronic. I don't mean to stand on your ground. I look at it similarly, but to me, it's like I'm okay with people getting the super upside. I just don't think you have to have then the downside if it doesn't happen. So the way I look at it is like we talked about in our post game for Ball State. Like Indiana gets these moments where a really good opportunity is ahead of them. I think this is one of the most interesting opportunities they have. I think what can happen is that people get all fired up for it, but then if let's say we lose to Michigan State, and suddenly it's like, oh damn it! Like I was like. Then they take the complete opposite fall down the other side. From the way I look at it, is I'm enjoying it. Like this is a fun time. We have an opportunity. We have we're looking at possibly 4-0, 5-0. Being 5-1, coming home against Iowa with a lot of good momentum there. Like that's exciting to look at. But I think on the flip side, what we can't have is if Michigan State beats us, we can't suddenly think, well, shit, it's all going down the tubes, because we can still get to 6-6. And honestly, losing to Michigan State was kind of already in the cards. Like this is like not beating Ohio State. I mean, we can still get to a bowl without beating Michigan State. And, Michigan State, this is kind of the next level win that we don't always get. And so I think as long as people there's nothing wrong with having fun optimism and looking at the upside of things, but then we can't have it where the team just totally gives up, or the fans just totally give up on the team. I mean, I always go back to 2010 where we started the season 3-0. That was a Ben Chappell year, but then we had Michigan, and it was 2 years in a row. Like the year before was that like held catch that both guys had, and the ref awarded it to Michigan. Like shocker, Big Ten refs give Michigan a call. But like it was all for the next year because we knew we had Michigan at home. They had Denard Robinson, and like we started 3-0. That game went to overtime, and we lost. And then it felt like the balloon was out of the air for the team. And then the team, I think, won one more game or 2 more games the rest of the year. Like it was just kind of a barrage of losses. And I just think what we can't do is build us up to a point where we now have unrealistic expectations, and we lose Michigan State. Suddenly it's like our season's over, because we're in a much different spot than Robert and Michigan State are, where if they lose this, like, yes, their goals are kind of changing for the year. If we lose it, our goals are still the same. We can still get to that 6-6 bowl.
Yeah, although I think, and this is, I guess, maybe the essence that I took away from the question that our friend asked, which is this concept of wild optimism. And I do think that there's a chance to get carried away here that people need to be careful about. Just because
Stevie Scott Heisman talk.
Well, I mean, that stuff's fun, but just whatever. I mean, even if you're looking at it at the 5-0 talk, it's like at the end of the day, there's
We could still be 5-7 or 5-6.
Well, it probably. I mean, it could happen. It probably won't. But the idea of, how people treat football within the confines of the IU fan base, and I'm talking about people as a whole, not just the very small, like minuscule subset of diehard football fans who, will ride hell or high water for their feelings about the football team. That's not the vast majority of IU fans. And I think, if people want IU football to become more popular than it is now, if they wanted to build a fan base, you have to try to find that proper notch between, hey, this team really has a lot of potential, versus if they lose a game, it's not like we're going to stop talking about them all of a sudden. And to some degree, that's what happened last year. I mean, especially, I would say the Michigan game, the Michigan game and the Ohio State game kind of ended up being bookends on this to some degree, where there was all that hype for the Ohio State game. It was sold out, and it ended up with, a close game, a fun game, a game that I don't think a lot of people thought IU was going to win. And IU stuck with it until the fourth quarter. And then it kind of got bookended by the Michigan game. And the Michigan game, unfortunately, started a string of 4 losses in a row. And it felt like, even though at the end of that, IU had the win at Illinois, they won the game versus Rutgers, it felt like by the Purdue game, the majority of people had stopped talking about the team. And, so that's how I look at it. And, it's not about 9 wins or 10 wins, or even about securing a bowl bid early. It's about sustaining, interest, and having that interest build based upon the activities of the team. And I guess avoiding, the bottoming out sorts of losses that we have seen out of IU football. Certainly we didn't see much of that last year. I mean, the worst loss they suffered was, I guess maybe it was the Wisconsin game at home last year, but that was kind of expected. But but maybe that Penn State game where, they were 2-1, they looked somewhat decent, and they ended up losing 45-14. But you see those a lot of times with IU, and it does, I think, have a negative effect on the way that people view, or their relationship with the team. Not the diehard football fans, but your everyday run-of-the-mill Indiana sports fan who probably would like to be more invested in the football team. So I think it's an interesting question. I'm really interested to see what happens in this game and what happens as a result of it, because, if IU wins, or if they keep it close, I think that has a really positive impact on people's impressions of the team. And I think that's something that can be built upon, particularly with Rutgers coming up next.
Yeah.
Question from the Hoosier Sound. Which freshmen will we see in prime time on Saturday, and how much will we see them?
I saw this question. I'm like, I think his name starts with Stevie and ends with Scott. I think we'll see him the most. I kind of get the feeling, too, that we're going to have to see a relatively good game and a little more Penix than we've seen in the past to have a shot at this. I don't know. I mean, what do you think? I mean, I think Stevie Scott's the obvious answer, but, I feel like we're going to probably need to see a good quarter and a half out of Penix to really have a shot at this.
I don't know if I agree with that. I think a lot of it's really going to depend on what the offensive approach is. I know that that's kind of a hedge, but the way I look at it is this: if Peyton Ramsey's in the game, even though, certainly we have talked about concerns about arm strength, he is able to complete a high percentage of passes. I am a little concerned, he's got this reputation for not making mistakes, and yet he hung passes up against both FIU and Virginia that could have been intercepted, and a couple of them were. But if he's keeping it under control, if there's spots in zone coverage that he's able to pick apart, at this point, I think they have a much better shot at winning the game if they don't have to play Penix that often. If it's a close game, if it's not a situation where they've had to bring a change of pace in, because I really think if you look at the way they've played these two quarterbacks, and if you look at the comments in the post-game press conferences and everything, they are, Tom Allen has built Peyton Ramsey up to be the leader of this team. Yeah. And I think that he loses credibility in the locker room if in a game where the things are in doubt, he's pulling his starting quarterback, his leader, and putting in a true freshman who hasn't taken that many snaps. I think the time for Penix to play is, frankly, what we saw against Ball State. if the Rutgers game gets out of hand and they can get him some snaps there, and then I think we see things develop. So I would take the opposite approach. I think I do think Stevie Scott will get a lot of carries, and his durability and his ability to hang on to the football, that one play against Ball State notwithstanding, I think that's a big key. I would keep an eye out for Ronnie Walker, because I liked what I saw out of him, and I think he provides a nice change of pace. And I wouldn't be shocked to see a rotation of backs by the time you get to prime time, to crunch time of this game, and see what happens there. I don't know. I mean, any other players that stand out to you as possibilities?
No, I mean, I'm going back. I'm looking. I mean, the only thing I would counter back to you is that, Tom Allen, he played, last year. You have Lego as the starter, and maybe he didn't feel like Lego was a leader of the team as much, but he knew Lego was going to be kind of the starter throughout the year. He played Ramsey in a series against Ohio State where it was still relatively close. Virginia was a really, really tough game. I know Lego wasn't having a great game, but he played Ramsey a lot in that game. So Allen has shown the ability to kind of have a pretty quick hook on starters. So that's where I think you could see Penix coming in. I mean, I still think Stevie Scott's pretty much the obvious answer.
I think here's the thing. I think if things start to get out of hand negatively for IU, I wouldn't be shocked if there was a change. But I think if the game goes the way that everybody's predicting, if it's a low-scoring game, if it's a ball control, field position type of game, if it's primarily running backs and kind of dinking the ball up the field, I don't see that as a scenario where he's just going to throw Michael Penix into the ball game. And to what you said earlier about this idea that that we need a quarter and a half of Michael Penix if IU's going to win, to me that would intimate that IU is trailing and needs a significant change of pace in order to keep up with what Michigan State's doing. So that's where I was coming from on that.
What about Reese Taylor as an answer? Like, I mean, somebody's kind of having a crazy game, like a couple of crazy.
Reese Taylor's that was kind of the guy I was hoping you were going to get to, because I really do think that Taylor could be the X factor.
Like having like a great defensive play, special teams play, doing something like on the flat.
Well, I think what's interesting about the way they're using Taylor, I mean, Taylor has been, obviously he got time at a couple of different positions over the course of the first few games. So far on the season, he's rushed 9 times for 42 yards. He's caught 6 balls for 37 yards, and he's returned 3 kicks for 22 yards. So he's put together a pretty interesting resume thus far in terms of what he can do in various places on the field. And
I also love, sorry to interrupt, I love, for the fans of NCAA football, like EA Sports games in the early 2000s, like I love that he's just listed as an athlete still.
Absolutely.
I love getting those 5-star athletes when he played that game, and then it's like you just plug him in at quarterback wherever you want. Anyway, I just love the athlete.
No, that's the thing. I mean, and unfortunately in NCAA, you had to pick a position before you could actually start the season. And in Reese Taylor's case, you don't have to. Like they're going to play him, and I think he might end up being the X factor in terms of where he plays and how his how his contributions chalk themselves up. Whether if they're running. One of the things I've heard, I wouldn't be shocked to see this, but I think Michigan State's probably looking out for it, since he is a quarterback. This idea of, can we run a jet sweep, fake run touchdown pass sort of play with Reese Taylor? Will they be looking out for that? I would imagine that they would, but that's the sort of flexibility that theoretically that guy gives you.
Yeah.
A couple other questions that we had. So in chat, Hoosier Man asked, what are the expectations for IU running the ball against the number 1 run defense in the country? Do you expect to see more Penix in order to stretch the field? So we kind of touched on this already. Here's the thing. There's 2 ways, in my opinion, to look at IU's running success so far. Stevie Scott's getting all the headlines, and look, he's the guy running the ball. But the strength of the offensive line for this IU team cannot be understated. It's a veteran offensive line. It's a line that's played significantly better than we saw through the first 3 games of last year. And I think that what you see is the ability of almost every other back that IU's got, with maybe one exception, who I won't mention by name, to be able to run effectively behind that line. Now, I think certainly you'll see some stretching of the field in terms of trying to widen the field. And I think that's where we might have seen a little bit of a clue to that in the Ball State game, where Ramsey would take the snap, drop back, run quickly through a couple of of progressions down the field and then would swing it out, for what would end up being a 3 or 4 yard passing play. Well, that may not seem like a lot, but against a team like Michigan State, who, they're kind of like a bear attacking a turtle. Like you're going to have to crack the shell gradually. I think that IU's going to have to do that. They're going to have to like spread things out a little bit if they want to get some space for that offensive line to start opening up holes. But I also, from what we've seen out of this offense over the course of the last year and a half, I think they're going to try to hit him head on. I think Mike DeBoard and Tom Allen are going to look at this and say, we actually think our offensive line is significantly better than the offensive lines that Michigan State's played against so far. And we believe we can run the ball right at them and have success, particularly at home.
Yeah. I mean, again, our offensive line has been opening up big holes, and that's kind of the Stevie Scott story, is he's done a good job of exploiting that, but there's been a lot of room for him to run in. And there's been some really good holes there. I mean, I think there's kind of a two-part thing here. If we're able to have a really good running game against Michigan State, I think it means that our O-line and, our backs are doing a very good job. I think the flip side doesn't have to be true, that if we get stopped on the run, I don't think that means that we don't have a good running attack this season. I think it could just be Michigan State's one of the better run defensive teams we're going to play in the Big Ten.
Maybe. I mean, and look, and obviously, I mean, if you look at Utah State's numbers, they have run the ball a lot. And, it's a question there was Utah State just not trying to run the ball? Were they not making a real effort? Did they decide to try to go around the obstacle than go through the obstacle? But as Patrick points out in the chat, his opinion is IU will get more than 65 yards rushing versus Michigan State. Michigan State may have a strong defensive line, but the offensive line is a big reason why Stevie Scott is producing. And again, as he points out, it's a size thing. And IU, they have size and they have the experience in the Big Ten to match up against this Michigan State line. It's certainly going to be interesting. If you go back and you look at how IU has fared against Michigan State the last couple of years. Last year they rushed 35 times for 94 yards. The previous year they rushed 39 times for 156 yards. And even going back, a lot of that might just be an artifact of where the game's being played. You go back to the previous year where it was a very close game until the fourth quarter again. IU only rushed the ball for 81 yards in that contest. But the previous year at home, in a game that IU frankly got throttled in, IU ran the ball for 213 yards against Michigan State. So there's some of this might simply be how is Michigan State at home versus how is Michigan State on the road. And I do think that will play a little bit of a role in things.
Yeah.
Let's get a couple of other predictions. Let's see. Do we have a chance to cover the spread against Michigan State? That also from the Hospital Bowl. So as of
4.5.
As of today, it's a 4.5 point spread. It opened at 3.5 in favor of Michigan State, and it's pretty much consistently 4.5 across the board. There's one book that has it at 4. I'd feel pretty good as a betting man of saying that even if IU lost, they were only going to lose by a field goal. I think this is going to be a very close game.
You've been doing this too long. You would never feel good putting money on IU football, one way or the other.
Well, I mean, I do think they do have one of the worst spread records, if I'm not mistaken. But actually, what I find more intriguing is the over/under for this game is only 48.5.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's not projected to be a very high scoring game, and that's actually the line I'm more curious about. Is what's your over/under pick on a 48.5 point spread?
Under.
You're saying under?
I think for IU to win, it probably has to be over.
I tend to agree. I think at home, if you look at what IU has been able to do offensively so far, I think 38 points, 20 points in a monsoon, probably should have had more, and then 38 points. I think that not scoring at least 28 points in this game would be a bit of a disappointment. And frankly, if you score 28 points against this Michigan State team, I think you win the game, because I have a hard time seeing Michigan State in their current offensive setup, and maybe, who knows, maybe they explode in the passing game in this contest, but I have a hard time seeing them scoring 31 or 34 or 35 points in this game. I don't know if Robert's got a feeling on that one way or the other.
Unless you brand new offensive line rolls out, I would be, if IU scores 28, they'll definitely cover. I would be very surprised if not outright win the game. Michigan State won't score 35 or more.
There you go. Bet the over and bet IU.
There you go. That's right. If you're gonna do one, you might as well do both because you're pretty much
parlay it together. Go for it. Misery and lose money altogether.
Yeah, I have a hard time seeing IU winning the game if they don't score at least 21, and I have a hard time seeing them losing the game if they score 4 touchdowns.
Well, the under's never good for IU ever. I mean, because it's always like not back to Michigan State, but like when we're playing under, it's like those games where it's like last year, it's like 9-6 the entire, and someone's like, that we're just not going to be the team to break that big play. That's just not the way we roll. And so and that's what happened against Michigan State last year. It was 9-6 for most of the game, and then we kept on like not getting that. We never got ahead, and then Michigan State broke it for a play, and it's like it's over.
Yeah. A couple other questions here. Jordan Brock asks this. I'll give this one to you first, Scott. If you had to pick one defensive player to have a huge game that gets a win over Michigan State, who would it be and why?
I'm better on offense than defense.
That's why I asked you the question.
Yeah, I know. I'd probably say, I'll kind of punt on this one. No pun intended. Yeah. I'd probably say either like Jonathan Crawford or Recon Jones. I mean, they had really good games last week. I know I was big on the D-line last week, but I do think for us to win this game, we're going to need to have one of those kind of game-changing plays we never seem to get. Like we're going to need a pick or a pick six, or we're going to need the defense to flip the field. And so I think that's more likely to happen from the secondary. And so I would say it's one of those two guys. I mean, if one of those guys has a couple of knockdowns, maybe a secondary blitz with a sack and a pick, which I could see Crawford having a game like that. I think that gives us a real shot to win.
I think I'll go with Marcelino Ball for many of the similar reasons that you're talking about. I mean, so much of Michigan State's success in this game to me hinges upon their ability to exploit IU in the passing game, especially in the intermediate passing game. And Ball plays such a crucial position in this defense in that Husky role that certainly I think you could say the whole secondary for IU I think is going to be the key. Like this is. To some degree, I think we saw the linebackers and the defensive line really kind of grow up and grow into themselves. And certainly the secondary had a really bad beginning of the season in that FIU game. I think that this is the game where the secondary really has to step up. And I think that Ball, as much as anybody, is going to be kind of the linchpin there because as the kind of the conduit, the translator piece between the front six, I guess, for lack of a better term, and the back four. He's going to have to be the one making sure that that coverages are where they need to be, that guys are doing what they need to do. So I don't know if it'll necessarily show up statistically. I think other players probably have a better chance at interceptions or have a better chance at higher tackle totals. But I think in this game, coverage is probably going to be the most important thing for IU's defense. So that's where I would start for this Indiana team.
Yeah.
Couple other questions here. So from Adam Allfeld. Hi, Adam. We're through the first quarter of the season.
Which is nuts to think that. I'm just reading that. It's insane to think we're already through the first quarter.
I know. It is pretty nuts. Who are your MVPs on offense, defense, and special teams? What's one area that needs to improve in order for IU to win at least 3 Big Ten games? So I'll tackle this. I think it's a cop-out for me to say the offensive line, but I'm going to say the offensive line is my MVP on offense. I don't care. It's my show. And the reason I say
show. Wow, flexing your muscle. It's our show.
Hey, somebody sent out the link to start this thing, and it wasn't you, okay? But I'll say this. I think that the offensive line has allowed everything to work this year where it really didn't last year. It's given Ramsey time to make throws. It's given Stevie Scott holes through which to run. It's really been consistently effective throughout all of these games, even in adverse weather conditions. And so to me, that's been collectively the MVP. And I don't know that you can necessarily single anybody out because I think they've all been important in their own way, even going down to the first line of depth. Defensively, as far as the MVP so far on the season, it's probably Jonathan Crawford. I mean, he's leading the team in solo tackles. He's been all over the place. He's got a sack on the year. He had an important takeaway in I think it was the first game of the season. And, it's been one of those situations where I think he's really contributed in a bunch of different ways to this team. And it's been impressive to me, how well he's stepped in. And I mean, he needs to as a senior. He's one of the few seniors on this defense. He needed to be there. But to me, he's a guy that we needed to have, really step up if IU was going to be successful, and he has so far. Special teams, I mean, I think you got to go with Jason Harris, just because he's made more of a mark than the rest of the special teams. Certainly you had, some kicking issues in the Virginia game, and you didn't have a lot to go off of in the FIU game because it was relatively early, but what he's added, he adds a spark that a lot of people didn't think was going to be there in the punt return game. And so I would definitely say he's the MVP there. As far as where IU needs to get better, I think, honestly, even though we haven't necessarily seen it yet, I think, their coverage in the secondary is probably the thing that needs to have the greatest improvement over where it is right now. Certainly I'd like to see more transcendent quarterback play. I think we're getting very consistent quarterback play now, which is good. It's hard to ask for more out of the running back situation. The wide receivers haven't been asked to do a huge amount. They were asked to do some in that FIU game, and they certainly came through. But the last two games, it's really been about the running game. And so, I think the receivers are there already. And I think the D-line has performed pretty well. And, given that there's really only two linebackers, consistently out there at any one time, I think the answer is the secondary. If that improves and that really rounds into shape the way that the rest of the defense seems to be rounding into shape, I think that makes it much easier for IU to pick up the 3 Big Ten wins that you need in order to get to a bowl game this year.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the special teams. I agree with the defense. I was trying to find kind of a contrary answer, but I think Crawford's the answer for defense. I think, Harris. I will say, Reese Taylor has been a nice little addition to the kick return. He doesn't have a touchdown, but he's averaging 22 yards a kick return. So, it's kind of a 1A. I think Reese Taylor, kind of having him again as that athlete on the special teams is nice. And again, I'm Stevie Scott Caulfield. So I like Stevie Scott. The offensive line has been really good, but Scott is still doing a great job of waiting a little bit and then hitting the hole. And again, I'll say 8th leading rusher in the country. So I got to say Stevie Scott on the offense.
Okay. Well, one last question, and we'll ask it in reverse order. This from Blake Lindsay. How many yards does Stevie Scott rack up, and what's the score prediction in this game? So I will throw that to you guys. We'll throw the rushing prediction to Scott first, and then let's have Robert give us a score prediction. Scott, you give us a score prediction, then I will do the same. So, Scott, go ahead.
They're kind of tied in because I do think, if Stevie Scott's over 100 yards, I think we have a really good shot to win. I think if he's, sub 60 yards, I think it gets tougher. I don't know. He's looked really good. And again, he's had a lot of times where he gets hit and continues to plow forward, continue to get yards. I have a hard time. It's IU football, so I have a hard time seeing anything. I could see him getting 7 yards and calling it a day. I could see. I think he's going to get close to around 100 yards. So I'll be optimistic and have fun and say he's going to get 108 yards.
Okay.
I'll go score prediction to Robert, and then I'll do mine.
Score prediction would be 24-20 Michigan State. Probably Michigan State a touchdown in the last 5 minutes to take the lead and win the game. And I would expect Stevie Scott to have under 50 yards rushing.
I like it. I'm just going to keep the optimistic streak going. There's something about this team I like. I think Michigan State is not quite as good as they've been before. I think also another prediction we got to do is the crowd size. I think we're going to have a really good crowd. I think the nighttime, I think there's just been a little buzz going around. Indy Stars talking stuff, which always gets people fired up. It's a night game. Again, Fred Glass is in charge of INDOT, so all 4 lanes of 67 are going to be open, or 69 are going to be open going south. So I think having, kind of almost the real opening of the stadium now, a night game, what should have been the Virginia game, I think you're going to have, 55,000 plus. Normally, Michigan State doesn't fill it with as many opposing fans as some other Big Ten teams. There's a pretty good contingent, but it's not like Ohio State or Purdue. All that said, I think things are pointing in the right direction. And you know what? Every time we're at the precipice of something nice, it never happens. And so it'd be really cool to see it happen once. I say Indiana wins 23-17.
Okay. So first of all, before I get to my predictions, the weather forecast for this game has been bizarre.
I know it was going to start raining and it didn't. And
well, and then today the forecast for the whole day for Saturday was that it was going to be sunny and 72 the whole day. Now there's rain back in the forecast, but only for the morning and early afternoon. And so now it looks like rain should dissipate. Again, this is according to Wednesday night's forecast. This could all change within 24 hours. Rain's supposed to dissipate by 3, and then you end up with decent weather, frankly, like mid-60s and a light breeze for the game. So, look, I think it's going to be a good set of circumstances for IU offensively. Now, I do think on the Stevie Scott front, Michigan State is going to be targeting Stevie Scott, not actually, hopefully not actually targeting him. We'll talk about it today, but they're going to be really zeroed in on Stevie Scott whenever he's on the field. I think it's going to be very difficult for the freshman to get the kind of yardage he's been getting. That doesn't mean I don't think IU is not going to have success on the ground. I do think that, whether it's Ronnie Walker or whether it's one of the other running backs, I do think that, they'll keep a steady stream of things going. I think Stevie Scott ends up with, I'm going to say 85 yards on the game. So better than the 60 or sub 60 total that you were concerned about. But on the flip side, a scenario, I think, where IU still rushes for about 150, 160 yards on the game. They just get contributions from elsewhere. And I think that, whether it's Ronnie Walker or whether it's somebody else, I do believe that there's enough talent and strength in the backfield that they'll be able to at least get some decent yardage. And I do think IU's offensive line is stronger than what the other two opponents for Michigan State have provided so far. I think it's going to be a really tight game. I think it's going to go back and forth. And frankly, I think it's probably going to be a game very similar to last year where, it came down to, turnovers and field position and punting. And what's the status? Does Michigan State still have the same punter that they had last year?
No, he graduated.
Okay, that's great news.
That guy, all we to know.
I have bad memories of that guy.
I'm sure he graduated.
Yeah, I mean, and obviously IU's had a few special teams bugaboos so far this season, whether it was blocking on field goals and extra points in the Virginia game or what have you. But I think it's going to be a really tight game. It's going to be a game about who makes the fewest mistakes and who's able to capitalize. And it's really been back and forth in my head. I do think that given that it's at home, given that Michigan State, they've had a week to kind of get better, but they've also probably maybe had a week to maybe fix things that IU is not going to try to exploit, but instead is going to try different things. I like IU in a squeaker in this game. I think it's going to be 23-20. So not a cover. I think it's a game that could go either way. I think there's going to be a couple of mistakes that one team's fans are just going to be like, wow, how did we lose that game? And I think just barely. I think IU is able to eke this one out. So it's a tight one. And, it's certainly a huge game for both teams. I think there's going to be a lot of emotion on the field. I think there's going to be a lot of emotion in the stands. This is really going to be the first full impact, nighttime game. And I'm really anxious to see how Memorial Stadium reacts. And then I think they're going to react pretty well. So,
yeah, a couple other questions for you.
Yeah.
Do you think if we win, I'm going to annoy the hell out of Robert to do a winning talk, but if we win, are we in the others receiving votes category of the top 25?
No, I don't think so. I mean, okay. I'll say this: as good as.
And by the way, this is IU football, Robert. Like we're excited. We're excited when they others receiving votes. Like, they remembered us.
IU has the longest consecutive streak in FBS of not being ranked in the top 25 of any of the Power 5 teams. It's been since
1994,
1993, I think. But or maybe it was 94. Whatever. It's been a long time.
Yeah.
And so, this is a situation that certainly IU is, I think everybody's watching. But the fact that they weren't also receiving votes this week, given some of the teams that were also receiving votes, makes me wonder if it's going to take them getting to 5-0 before they even get to the also receiving votes category.
Which sucks, because then we lose to Ohio State, and so then we beat Iowa. I mean, now we're talking nutties talk, but if we beat Iowa, then we lose to Penn State. Like, we may not, if we ever were able to get ranked this year, wouldn't be until we could somehow beat Minnesota and Maryland.
Look, I could be wrong. I mean, Michigan State is still ranked. I think just barely at this point, but they are, unless I'm mistaken, they're still ranked in 24th, and so that might get them on enough. Here's the thing, and it's not a commentary on whether I want IU to also receive votes. It's more a matter of, are they going to be on the radar of people who are voting? And I just don't know if beating Michigan State. I think it'll be, I've heard it's like the Virginia guy or one of the ACC guys got asked, is Virginia good or not? And the guy's response was, well, they lost to Indiana, so I guess they're not good. And I think that's that's the attitude that IU has to fight. It's like an automatic, wow, you lost IU, you must suck.
Right.
As opposed to, wow, IU must be good because they beat you. And so I still think there's some of that to overcome.
What do you think of the crowd size? What's your prediction?
I think it's going to be close to a sellout. I'm going to say official total is going to be like 50 or 51.
Wow.
I mean, I'll be honest. Is
the buzz in Bloomington pretty good so far?
I've had more people contact me for tickets for this game than any game since, Ohio State last year. That was the last time that people were really beating down my door for tickets. The parking lots are all sold out, so nobody can get parking. People are having to get routed around to the Poplar's garage or, one of the B school garages. People are going to be paying $20 to park there and walk.
So you're telling me I should make Robert pay for these tickets I'm giving him?
Yes, this is a hot ticket. I got people that would, probably ask for the tickets for free, but they would still now. And as Patrick points out in the chat, there are tickets available online, so it's not like you can't find tickets. But as of right now, those tickets are all bought. Like, the question is, will people buy the tickets and go inside? And I get the sense, because it's a 7:30 game, because it's supposed to be a pretty nice evening. Because we're still a week away from basketball. I think that people are going to show up, and I'm excited. I think that there's some buzz around this team, at least here locally, and I think that that's going to carry over into the crowd size.
Yeah, I saw somewhere it was Crimson Quarry had some pictures of parking passes going for $300.
That's insane. That's crazy.
I'm trying to find. I'm not sure if it was.
I've got two. I should just sell mine now. I could put my kids through college partially. That's great. No, if you find that'd be interesting. But
parking passes only. No, they haven't been sold. But there's right now only 6 parking passes listed on StubHub. Now I know that FanDuel is one of the sponsors of CrimsonCast, not StubHub. No. But dude, it's gate 11 for $499. Gate 9 for $225. Jesus,
they've got to just be. I'm sorry, and I have parking passes in lot 12. They're great. I bought extra.
Email us, by the way. Email CrimsonCast if you want my parking passes for $300.
They've got to just be trying to nab some moron from Lansing who's going to drive down. It's like, well, this seems like a good deal. I don't know where else to park. There's so many places to park on a weekend in Bloomington. I don't know why you would pay that much money for a pass, but anyway, I digress. Anyway, we got to run. Robert, thank you very much for joining us. This was a real pleasure. Hopefully, have you on again during basketball season.
What's on the grill for the tailgate?
The plan is to do a really long tailgate, so there's going to be lunch and also dinner. And
we're trying to make it so the whole CrimsonCast crew will be there.
Yeah, it'll be fun. So we're still working on the menu, but watch this space. We'll have some previews coming.
I want something make your own. I missed make your own breakfast sandwiches, so I want something good.
Yeah, I was gonna say you missed the breakfast sandwiches yesterday or this past week. Those were a lot of fun. So
we'll do a make your own taco bar or something for dinner.
Yeah, a taco bar to tailgate. That's no, we're not doing that. Anyway, for Robert, who's been nice enough to join us, for all you folks who wrote in your questions, for our fine folks in the chat who bore through the entire hour, and for Scott, I'm Galen Clavio saying thanks for joining us once again on Crimson Cast. If you're around in lot 12, come find us. We'd love to see you at the tailgate. We'd love to crack open a beer and chat about IU football for a little bit. But from all of us to all of you, we'll catch you folks on the flip side. So long, everybody.